If an eclectic artist has a superpower, it would be in the use of patterns. Patterns are so powerful because of the way they add interest and energy to a work. Hello, my name is Kathleen Mower from Be Again Books, and I'm happy to be here today to talk to you a little bit about the use of patterns and how to mix them and use them effectively in our junk journals. As a paper artist, we're using patterns that are already designed, and our challenge is to use them effectively within the whole work of our journal. If you want a journal that is calm and peaceful, you might need to limit your use of bold colors and patterns in that journal. But that's the kind of thing that eclectic artists love, that power and energy. And so the more the better if you're talking about an eclectic style. There are just a few things, principles really, to understand about patterns, and that will help you to design more effectively when you're using patterns. So I'm going to share 6 tips that I've learned about mixing and matching patterns in an eclectic journal. Thanks for joining me today. Okay, here are my 6 tips, and I have put these into a document. So here's the top. I'll arrange it so you can take a screenshot. And there's the last one. Okay, let's talk about the number one principle, I guess, that you need to understand about patterns is that they have a scale or size. Some are large, some are small. Every pattern has a size. When you mix them together, just try to make sure that they aren't all the same size. So variety, my tip here is variety is the key. Choose large scale patterns, but combine them with medium and small scale patterns as well to avoid a kind of clash or fight for dominance. So you've got here 2 large scale patterns, this one and this one. And when you put them together, they're each going to fight for your eye because they're the same scale. Here's another pattern in this hymn page, but it's a smaller pattern. It's a smaller scale. So you can mix those together really well because even though they're both patterns, one is large, one is small. And so the small one is not competing. If you want to use them together, as long as you put a smaller one between them, you know. So here's another couple of small scale patterns in the same tones, right? If you just put all small together, that's also going to seem a little bit boring. But if you can mix the patterns in large and small, then it doesn't become boring at all. Okay, so this one is also kind of small in scale. It's just a mixed media kind of pattern, but that also helps balance and helps the patterns not to fight with each other. Okay, the second tip is about color. So patterns have color. Now these have just kind of 3, maybe 4 tones all together, but they're similar. And so that's my second tip, is to keep your colors similar or complementary. They don't always have to match exactly, but try for harmonious. Pick up less dominant colors from one pattern and find these colors in other patterns. So if we use that idea, then we can choose other patterns that have the same kinds of tones and colors and continue to mix colors. And we'll talk about this again. I'll give a second brighter kind of example in a minute. Patterns are also simple and complex. So some patterns have more energy than others. In the same way that a small scale pattern balances a large scale pattern, a complex pattern sometimes benefits from blending with a simple pattern. Okay, so you've got in these two original, let's call them the focal patterns here, they both are complex, right? This one's extremely complex. There's just a lot going on there. Even though there's not a lot of colors, it's really complex patterns. Okay, so, but as I mentioned, this is a very simple pattern. It can seem complex, but because of the color, there's really only two colors going on here, it becomes a little less complex. But this one is even less complex. The pattern itself might be complex, but the color is less complex. And so it backs the pattern off. Okay, this pattern is very non-complex, uncomplicated. And so it becomes almost a neutral color in the midst of all of these patterns. Okay, so a small scale pattern like this is going to have a different weight, a different ability to balance than these complex patterns. So you can blend the simple and complex. And speaking about weight, you have to kind of consider the weight of the patterns in both scale and color. So this is what I'm talking about. In scale, because of the scale of this pattern next to this pattern is definitely heavier than this pattern. But this pattern is heaviest because of the color. It's the same kind of colors, but this is more solid, more heavy. Darker colors are always heavier in weight than lighter colors. So consider the weight of patterns in both scale and color. This seems a little hard to explain and is surely subjective to our own eye, but some prints seem heavier or lighter in scale, complexity, and certainly color. So some prints just seem heavier, and too many heavy prints together just seems heavy. So you can balance a heavier print with a lighter print, or at least use fewer heavier prints overall or next to each other. Okay, so number 5 is use solid and neutral colors as a balance. Too many patterns can seem overwhelming to the eye. You need to please yourself for sure, but if necessary, adding solid colors and neutral colors can tone down the energy. Being aware of artistic white space gives your patterns a place to breathe. So solid colors can help balance these complex, large scale patterns. Okay. Finally, my number 6 tip is to use texture as a bridge. Texture adds another stopping place for the eye to rest in the midst of the energy of all the patterns together. It just says to the viewer, hold on a minute and look at me. So this page has texture in it. It's a two-dimensional texture because of the, it's just flat. It's just a flat paper and it's a photograph of texture, but it's still a textural page. So you can see in this page, the designer has used this pattern and this pattern, all of these together. The overall pattern is a stripe, but there's all these other different patterns together. And what they've done is used some texture of the lace, the stitching, the solid colors. Those are all kind of bridges that help move your eye across the pattern and see the pattern without your eye just being completely overwhelmed. So you can take that same principle and use, where is the dark? There it is. So you can take that same principle and use it in the same way to kind of bridge between patterns. Here's the other large scale pattern. And that dark color just helps make a bridge between these and these. Okay? All right, let me just give you another couple examples with some color involved. So let's add red to this bunch of patterns. I wish I had a bigger desk and more of a bird's eye view. But so let's just limit our choices here in the beginning. And we'll take this big pattern and this big pattern and this big pattern. So these are all three large scale patterns. So according to our tips, I can use color to help mix these patterns together. And so we've now added the color red. But the scale and the complexity is still, you know, pretty chaotic. So we can add, again, a solid color, a more solid color. And okay, this is another red. It's another kind of large scale pattern, but it's a different type of pattern, right? It's a polka dot. And so that's something different. So if we want to now tone that down a little bit, we could take a small scale and add that in. Okay, so let's maybe take the butterflies out. And now we have these. That's a nice mix to my eye anyway. And you have to remember that obviously this is just based on what I like, right? I'm the artist and I'm choosing the colors and the patterns. So I would put these patterns together and feel happy about it. Partially because this pattern is acting kind of like a solid. Yeah, and this is a small scale, and so we can divide those, and those mix together well, I think, okay? So we could, at this point, we could still add the butterflies in, I think, and especially if we add another neutral-ish pattern, right? Okay, so what if we wanted to add another complex pattern? This is pretty complex, but again, the color is going to kind of tone down the other patterns, give your eye something different to look at. Yeah, I think we could mix all of those patterns really well. And especially if we add in a couple of other neutral colors. Right? This is a small scale. It kind of helps balance the larger scale. Yeah. Okay. So let's just get rid of these colors and kind of head toward some more brighter colors. But before we do brighter colors, let's just take another example of simple, large, complex, small, weight, that kind of thing. So these were all patterns that came right out of a paper pad, okay? And so you can see how the designer has used these patterns together, but she has, or he, whoever designed these papers, let's think about scale or size. So we've got large scale pattern and we have a smaller scale pattern. here's kind of a medium pattern. The actual elements are about the same size in both of these, but can you see how the weight is different? This is just a heavier pattern, and that's because the colors are brighter and heavier, and these are neutral and they kind of recede. So this is a brighter color, but it's heavier because it's more of a solid color. I hope you can kind of get a feel for what's happening here. So these are two large scale patterns that are somewhat competing with each other, right? This one's a little heavier only because it has darker colors in a more dominant way than this one. And so what happens when we take a smaller scale pattern is it just kind of balances that. We can use a more solid in this color as well. Okay, and now when we add this one, this is just a really complex pattern, but when you put it next to this color or this one, this is a much more small scale pattern, and so you can put those two patterns together and it looks really nice. Okay, and then you can even add another complex pattern, larger scale pattern, but if you use this neutral kind of as a bridge, then that helps balance it. Okay, this one the same way. So there's all kinds of ways you can mix them if you can kind of keep these basic pattern principles in mind. Okay, now let's go with a pattern that is just simply more color, you know, more complex. And this is a pretty complex pattern. So let's just consider the scale. This is large. It's a large scale pattern, right? This one is also a large scale complex pattern, but the colors are complementary, okay? There's colors in here that are not in here, but largely you can choose colors in another pattern that will complement that. And so these two, I think those patterns can blend because the colors are similar. The scale is similar, so let's add a smaller scale pattern. The actual pattern is more on the large size, but because the color is less heavy, this is a lighter weight color, then it can bridge those two, right? Now, again, the colors don't always have to match. This is a different color than this. The pattern weight is about the same. The simple versus complex is about the same. So if we find another pattern that could kind of be more of a solid, then that helps kind of balance all of them. Do you see? And they kind of start to mix. So I think that all of these patterns can mix really well. So we can also, using the same principle of color, we can choose to bring in this color, and this color appears in both of these patterns. So that can mix. But this is also a large pattern, right? Yeah. And you want to kind of try to avoid putting too many large patterns together without adding some of these other principles. Okay, so if we put those three together, that's kind of overwhelming. I like it, but I like to mix patterns. But if that's overwhelming to your eye, then what you can do is choose a color like this yellow. The pattern, the scale is smaller, the color is more on the neutral side, and so it can bridge all four, or it can bridge all three of those big patterns and kind of give your eye a place to sort of rest. Same with this pink. Can you see that just tones down the chaos a little? Now, if we choose the orange, then there's still a little more energy, right? Because there's more energy in orange than there is in pink. But what if we just add another large pattern? Because I love patterns. Again, we can add this, and between, even though this is more energetic than this, next to this one, it is more neutral. It tones it down. So that's basically, in a nutshell, how you mix patterns in a junk journal. Just use these basic principles of patterns and you'll be good. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. I do have a little bit of a preview. I received some happy mail some months ago from my friend Linda. Her channel is Linda's Paperworks, and she sent me a beautiful happy mail. It was packaged much more artistically than this, but I want to do a second eclectic journal. I want to use this happy mail. And so the next video is going to be kind of showing this happy mail, choosing some patterns to go with it, and then I'll go away and make that journal as well. Thanks again for spending time with me today. I hope that was a helpful lesson on mixing patterns.